We're back this week for another episode on Italian politics with myself, Mattia, and Fabio. I think today we're going to talk about two main topics. Probably focus a bit more on the first one, which is DL Lavoro, which stands for essentially the Job Act or the job policy that the government has sort of presented a first draft at the start of May. It's not finalized yet. It's just the government sort of presents this draft, makes it a DL, which is a sort of a law that stays in place but needs, all the process to go to the parliament. We'll talk about what's in there for now and what's been drafted and proposed. And the second topic is a bit more political and mixed with sort of what's been happening in Italy. I think it's finished right now, which is the Biennale, which is, I guess, an architecture and arts event that happens in Venice. As the word says, I think it's every 2 years. And essentially, what's been happening in regards to the stand that is the Russian stand. So the Biennale is made of all countries bring their stand, and there's been a big debate about whether to include or exclude the Russian stand in there. So we'll talk about that in the second part. But without further ado, who would like to go ahead with the jobs policy?
I'll break the silence. Welcome back. Welcome, Edoardo. Welcome, Mattia. Fair Work Bill, the DL Lavoro, as many times we have commented so far, another decree, which in Italy is usually used for emergency. This is not clearly the case. The Meloni government is fairly able, we gotta say the truth, in controlling the narrative over the media. So they released this decree around the 1st of May, if I am not mistaken, which is Labor Day in Italy and in many other countries. So they could say they are doing something. And to be honest, this decree is definitely multifaceted, has lots of lights and shades, but unlike many other pieces of work of this government, it contains some interesting parts, in my opinion. Overall, this is not resolutive at all. It is not an ambitious law. It just tackles or tries to tackle some details of the worst labor degeneration on the market. But in some cases, there is some different approach that might be interesting. And it is to be noted that some of those, and probably will get deeper into the details later, it is driven by EU regulation. And I'm thinking about the gig economy regulation, which is like a new, not so new really, part of our economy. I will leave it here for the moment and I'll pass it to Mattia.
Yeah, I think that I will spend a few words on the introduction of a new concept that is like, I don't know if it's, I never heard something like this around the world. So usually, like here in Australia, you have a minimum salary. So now in Italy, we have introduced something that is called fair salary. The reason here that is, I think, is interesting to explain is that in Italy we have what we can call corporations, literally, like the journalist corporation, the chemist one, like in my case being a chemist, etc. And the contracts, the regulation of the contracts and the salaries are controlled by these corporations. So when we say that in Italy there is no minimum salary, is not completely true, because if you are a chemist, for example, or if you're a journalist, etc., you have the right to a certain salary accordingly to the contract stipulated by your corporation. However, if you fall outside any of these corporations, of course, there is no minimum salary, and those jobs are those are the risk. So the government here, because in the last years there is a massive pressure to introduce also in Italy a universal minimum salary, let's call it like that. Especially from the left, but not only from the left. The government in this decree try to, I don't know, in my opinion, find to go in the middle, find some sort of balance between all the opinion of the government and also the opinion of the opposition and other forces, and especially these corporations, because I know, and it's important, in my opinion, to underline that these corporations are against a minimum salary because they will lose power in that scenario. And so basically, this fair salary, to conclude, is simply the government, in my understanding, then correct me if I'm wrong, is will sort of control that these contracts are respected. And are also updated, for example, to include the inflation, the increase in cost of living, and so on and so forth. About the rest of the decree, to be fair, in my opinion, is a massive amount of subsidies and incentives, nothing more than that, for women, for young people below 35, if I remember correctly, for the special economic zone, so-called, which is basically the south.
The south up to Abruzzo now. Am I correct?
Abruzzo, yeah.
Molise, yeah. It's creeping up.
yeah. And it's like more bonus to the to those companies that they have permanent contracts, like trying to fight this one of the problem or supposed problem in Italy of having a massive amount of short contract. So this is more or less what is this decree. I don't know what you think about it. This sort of fair salary to me sounds a bit bullshit, to be honest.
Sorry, Mattia, can you please clarify? You said before there are corporations in Italy. Why did you say corporation instead of unions, for example?
Oh, this is a very good question. For me, they are corporations.
Well,
okay, but you meant unions.
Can I? No. Can I just clarify that? I think we're talking about two slightly different things. Fabio, you're referring to trade unions, which going back to the fair salary conversation, this fair salary is not a minimum wage as it is in Australia, but it sets some rules in order for what the trade unions negotiate at a national level in order to get what is a fair salary and what is the minimum wage inside the contracts that is done through trade unions in Italy for certain roles, which cover most roles, by the way. Most full-time jobs are covered by some level of trade union.
Yeah.
But what Mattia was referring to, which is also true, is there are also corporations which usually this stems from back in the centuries in Italy, which usually stems from what in Australia you would refer to as professionals. So there's the lawyers corporation, there's the architects corporation, there is the journalist corporation. They're not a trade union, slightly different, because they are specifically for a certain role, but they hold a massive amount of power. You have to be part of the corporation to practice a certain profession, but they also play a big role when it comes to what Mattia was saying, which is the salary, because you need to be in this corporation to practice certain professions, and so they influence a lot whether what the minimum wage would be, and what the minimum, I would say in certain cases, commission that you charge being part of that profession, and they negotiate with the government as well. One thing that made this fair salary also more similar to minimum wage is if the corporations or unions or whoever creates these national contracts, wants to access incentives that this new legislation is putting in place, they need to make sure that, or businesses in general, they need to make sure that they abide by these rules of a fairer salary in order to access incentives. But it's still not a minimum wage, because the concept of minimum wage, which we have in Australia, it doesn't fully exist in Italy. So in Australia, it's like minimum wage across the board. You can't pay anyone. Whereas in Italy, the way in which it's work, it almost exists, but it's very different. It's sort of like there is minimum wages in certain industries that differ a little bit, and they cover, let's say, 90% or 95% of workers. I guess the gap is there is a small share of workers where that minimum wage doesn't exist, but that's not the biggest problem. I think the biggest problem is a much larger share of workers that work in the black market or in unregulated market, which results into obviously an illegal lower than the minimum or fair salary. That is the problem, because if those illegals were put inside a contract that is a national contract or whatever, they would have to follow that rule of that essentially minimum salary for that role.
If I can clarify quickly, because Fabio is right, and also Edoardo. I say cooperation also because I had in mind a journalist one, because I was reading today the considering the fair salary is one of the worst in this moment, because it hasn't been revised for 10 years or something like that, to inflation, cost of living, etc. So in the case of journalists, for example, it's the corporation of journalists that is doing the job. And again, to be a journalist, you need to be part of the corporation. So in that case, but for example, for other corporation, Edoardo mentioned the lawyer, it's a bit different because, of course, they don't regulate salaries. In that case, they regulate how much you have to ask for any service. So in Italy, a lawyer cannot ask
less than.
they have to ask a minimum amount for any service. I have some friends that are lawyers, and I discovered this that is very funny. They cannot make massive discount. So this is how is regulated the style. They need to ask a minimum for every service they do, and by competition. But so yeah, it's a bit because depends on the job you have. Most of the job are under a trade union, correct? Some others are regulated by the corporation, like the journalist is a good example. And then you have a small percentage that I think 5% is around 5% is correct, that they are out of any sort of regulation, and so they don't have a minimum wage or anything. So again, the situation is very complicated.
You said 5%, but in my mind, it is a much larger number, because if you think about, for example, waiters and people working on hospitality, they don't have a national contract to align to. They don't have a union, they don't have an order or a guild. So it must be a bigger number than 5%.
Yeah, so I don't know the exact number, whether 5%, but so I also worked as a waiter. With like waiting, that's one example. The biggest problem is not the minimum wage, but the fact that 50% of the hours are off the books.
No.
The ones that are on the books, which are on the contract, they follow the law that tells on that contract that is whatever the law, the terms and conditions on that contract, which have a minimum wage in there. The problem is half of waiters or half of the hours, what often happens is actually because you can't have everyone unemployed, like have everyone on black, what often they do is they hire you're working full time, but the contract says you're working part time. Yeah. So that if someone comes in and checks, it's like, he's part time. He's doing his shift of the part time, but actually he's working completely full time. And so half of the hours are legal and paid with the minimum wage. The other half are paid cash in hand. And the problems there are obviously of two natures. We can go and talk about DL Lavoro, but I want to clarify this. Is on one side there is no minimum wage, but there's a bigger problem of all the safety and security, but also the what we call the pension or superannuation or all of that, because you don't get any of that payments for years, and then long term you don't have a pension. But also the system loses from this because you're not investing in the future, and so you will need to rely in the future onto the general taxation in order to sustain you and support you. But yeah, I see what you're saying. Like 5% to close this debate is just pull out of the hat. I'm not sure it's 100% 5%. Could be 10, but I don't think. I'm like pretty sure it's not that big of a number. The main concern is the large share that is unseen, like it's off the books, and that is obviously not negotiated, not seen. There's no minimum wage there, and so on.
Yeah, I think that, then I'll leave it to you, Fabio, that this decree is just on trying to solve the issue we are discussing. What we are talking about is sort of related. The aim of this decree is trying to solve this issue, trying to increase the salaries, at least those that are covered by some sort of trade union or corporation, etc., and trying to give also increase the salary, because as you know, in Italy the salary are not increasing, especially when you consider the cost of living in the last years. So is all connected to that, I guess. My point here is that I'm not sure this is the way to do it, especially when you consider the other part of the decree that is trying to sort of increase the number of permanent contracts, especially amongst young people and women, simply giving incentives to the companies, especially. Though I'm not sure this is going to have any real effect.
Yeah.
On this point, I think for women, it's the only one that really makes sense, and possibly even for young people, but I'm a little bit more doubtful. For women, it makes sense because if you retain more people in the market, more women in the market, eventually you make families stronger. Having families with 2 wages in, and we know that countries with higher women employment rates, they do perform better. But yeah, I share the same opinion of you. I definitely don't think this is the right way of solving the big strategic structural issues of our labor market. And it all goes back about, in my opinion, the swing between flexibility and what's the opposite of flexibility? Staticism, being extremely strict with rules. So the 3 of us live in Australia, and we all know that if there's a crisis, the economic crisis, if our company doesn't perform well, we're going to be made redundant or asked to stay home, reduce our time. And this is kind of, I would say a fairly simple economic rules. So it's simple here in Australia, it's simple to hire, it's simple to fire. In Italy, on the other side, it is said that it's extremely hard to fire. And the laws that would along the years have been passed to increase flexibility in the market, they didn't give the expected results. Flexibility just became another word for precarity, for poor worker. Our generation grew up thinking that it was okay to do 1,000 little jobs, and it was extremely hard to get a permanent contract. This has never been fixed. Not even the Renzi reform of the Jobs Act did anything. And I found myself in experiencing that because I'm an architect, and in Italy, all the new architects, 95%, all of the architects, they are employees, are just collaborators, but you don't decide the working time. You basically don't decide anything because you're really being hired.
You're a casual.
But technically you are casual. You could say, "Oh no, this next week I can't. Sorry," but it doesn't work like that. You don't get sick leave. You don't get maternity and paternity leave as you should. You get paid very little, and as Mattia Edoardo was saying before, for the waiters, part of the money comes unregistered from a black book, and this is all very poor and extremely widespread, from the top studios to the very small practices. And this is something. This is the main issue that labor decree should tackle, in my opinion, and because this is what young generation really care about, and this hasn't been addressed. Fair wage is a nice claim, I gotta say. They came up with a very nice claim. It's not minimum wage; it's fair wage. Again, I don't understand how things work. Why, if we have a problem, we don't try to solve the problem, but we try to make the part, whoever is already in a decent situation, in a better situation, improve their economic situation. In this case, the objective is to reduce the amount of what in Italy are called pirate contract, national contract, that are dodgy contracts that are valid because they've been signed countrywide, but they've been proposed by dodgy associations that represent a very little share of the category, but they might, be the base for a large amount of contract, and these people is effectively underpaid. I would like to know how these things can happen. It feels like a very simple fudge, a very simple cheating, but this fair work decree doesn't address that. It just says whoever has already a national contract and has already been paid decently can be paid even better, which is great because wages are low in Italy. So, people needs more money in the pocket. But what about the people that haven't been paid decently?
Yeah.
Not to mention all the, that's probably we'll talk about it later. But all the people in the fields, as Edoardo was saying before, the black market. But also we have people that work with no documents, with no rights at all, and we'll be touching the digital caporalato maybe later.
Yeah.
Without tackling the real caporalato.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many problems that would solve with the workers' or labor policy that we're not addressing. I think when I sort of reviewed this decree that was shared, or this policy, the draft, I think there's a couple of things that are the classic problems that you would notice across Italian politics. We discussed it in previous episodes as well. One is around the fact that on one side there's no money and resources to make too much of a change because as money has been spent elsewhere. We discussed this in previous episodes, but when we think about what this decree is doing, is also using the old approach of giving out some handouts here and there, some incentives here and there, without solving the broader problem. So in principle, I would agree that incentivizing people that are unemployed under 35, which is giving some money to whoever hires them. In principle, I obviously agree. in giving an incentive to hiring unemployed women. That's what the decree does. Is it gives incentives to companies to hire unemployed women. But this is not a good way to approach such a structural problem for the long term. The question that the government is missing in asking themselves is, how do we, on one side, more structurally improve unemployment by reducing it and improve salary? And salary cannot be improved long term by legislation. It can only be improved by increasing productivity in long term. This is actually a very common theme that now Australia is following path with Italy, along the lines of lower productivity growth is not zero productivity growth, is resulting into stagnant salaries and stagnant real salary growth. This is the same thing, and this decree does not address that, but it's not the degree that should, or the policy that should address that, but should make things easier, more smoother, should provide businesses with simplification of the bureaucracy that allows people to employ. However, if you want to solve these problems, you got to go beyond just labor policy. You got to look at fiscal policy. You got to look at how to increase productivity. You got to look at reforming the justice systems and education systems. So there's so many more things you need to do. But to Fabio's point, some things that you maybe could have done through this labor that maybe were not so structural but are still important in a country are along the lines of either what I would call regulating unregulated position and making them surface. So whether it's people working in the fields in southern Italy, working in the in the farms that are unregulated, or even those that are working without a document, make that component. So how do we find a way through a labor policy to surface this, let's call it black market, let's call it off the books market, and you make an incentive for that to be surfaced, because overall it's a win-win both from the employee but also for the employer, from the state itself. This decree is obviously missing that. This policy is missing it. I think that's a missed opportunity. But I'll pause it there. I don't know if you want to add more, Mattia, on this. But
I would like to add, 3 points that we didn't touch and are correlated. The first one that it comes also from my experience is that besides these national contracts that are regulated by categories, trade union, etc., there is also another problem that is the internship period. So frequently you have internship periods, especially for young people then, after, for example, when you come out from university. And those contracts are usually quite low. You're hired through a contractor. They are not really regulated much, so you get a minimum that is very low. And they cannot be renovated for too long, I guess. I think now, when I was still in Italy, so a while ago, was 1 or 2 year maximum. But this creates a sort of, I would say, weird period of time, especially when you get out for university, even if you go to work for a company. Like in my case was not as big company, we were talking about 100 employees. In the first 2 years, you are underpaid, clearly.
yeah,
And
apprendistado.
Yeah, exactly. The tool they have is this sort of internship through a contractor, and they allow you to save money on your salary for at least 2 years.
Yeah.
And this part, I think, it gets even worse if you consider, along with the off the book payment, when you remember one thing, that is that in Italy the number of very small companies is massive. And with small, I'm talking about less than 10 employees. And the dodgy contracts or off the book payments, etc., is especially true for these kind of companies, and they generally pay low salaries because they're small, they have low productivity, etc. And this is the second point. And the third point that is not addressed in this law is we were talking about the minimum salary, like in Australia, or fair salary, like it's called here. That Italy is a very diverse country in this regard. And a minimum salary or fair salary, how you want to call it, in Milan cannot be the same like in Sicily. Even in Australia, where we are
Yeah.
talking from, in the university where I work, the university in Sydney, they pay a bit more than the university in the rest of the country because
They're
because
aware
the
of-
living, which in Sydney is mainly related to real estate, so for renting, etc. But you get some more money if you have the same position in university in Sydney, because it's taken into account. Okay, then the university is public, so I don't know if also also private company, maybe they have an office in, I don't know, in Brisbane and in Sydney. They consider this. I don't know. I know the university they do.
Yeah.
And in Italy, this difference is even bigger, I would say, because now Milan, for example, I was reading the other day, the renting and purchasing price of houses is higher than London. So, and in Sicily is way cheaper.
Yeah.
And again, this is a big problem that we are not addressing. You cannot have the same salary in Milan that you have in Sicily because you don't live. You might have a very good life in Sicily, in Milan you don't live. And this, I think, is another big problem that is not addressed here, and is a endless problem since the beginning of the country, I would say. And again, there is absolutely not even a discussion about this. And there are many categories that they're getting basically the same salary, but they live in places with an extremely different cost of living. That's
Yeah,
I think
just to add on that. That's great. 3 points. On the first point, in like just to give the audience an understanding, the internship or apprendistato salary, monthly salary, fluctuates between like 600, 700, 800, maybe 900 euros if you're lucky, 1,000 if you're super lucky, euros a month. So like in Australian dollars, that's what 1,400 a month, and it covers rent if you're lucky, and then that's it. Which is essentially sort of saying
not
and
in
meaning
Milan.
that
For
yeah,
example,
in Milan it might
no.
even cover rent, and it's essentially saying you have two options: either you got mom and dad helping, or you get another job. There is no way you can do that and live off that because you only have these two options, and often people lucky they've got mom and dad helping out in the first year or two, or second option, some people will have to go and get another job, and this falls under, I think, what sort of we touched a little bit upon, which is what's referred to as poor labor or poor work, which means people working but still not making means and meet and end of the month. So I think that's another conversation, and it's not necessarily related to labor policy. It might, like, labor policy should fix the internship, obviously, like shouldn't allow that to happen. But there's a broader problem of like low level salaries as well, which probably is not just labor policy.
And also universities, if I may add, because universities don't really teach you the skills that are required at work. And so every employer, when you ask for your first employment, they tell you, yes, I have to propose you for an apprenticeship, a traineeship contract, because you don't really know what to do here in the office. Because they didn't teach at university. So it's a whole loop that starts and ends with the state and its decision, really. And it could be fixed if there was political willing. But there's clearly not, because these issues are issues, and I don't think this government has a long-term plan, or at least not anymore.
Not anymore, for sure. Cool. Should we move on to the next topic?
Yeah,
Do you want to add something, sorry, to close off, or?
Just about the gig economy
Yeah.
and the worker. I don't know if you read much about it. Because if not, we can skip it.
I did read some of the intros, and I think the way in which I understood and I could summarize it. So the gig economy mostly, especially in Italy, but I think even in the rest of the world these days, when we talk about labor, refers mostly to riders or people delivering food. There's obviously other positions, but that seems to be like the main one and the most affected one. And my understanding is what this policy or this draft policy is aiming to do is applying, as you said, I think some European Union legislation, which essentially makes sure that there are some guardrails, and we'll call it protections and guardrails towards these workers, which I think is 100% necessary, especially because in Italy, a lot of these workers were obviously casual, but they have zero protection. There's also an aspect of this, and I think this ties back to the black market, sort of on off the books, along the line, some legislation in place to ensure identification of riders is sort of centralized, and the ID of these people is centralized. In Italy, we use a speed system, which is like a system to identify citizens, and I think part of that stems from, on one side, making sure that everyone is correctly registered on these platforms, that is working. On the other end is like, if you're registered, it's probably easier to understand how much money and how much income you're getting off these platforms, and then from there obviously remove and reduce the amount of money that doesn't get sort of declared in your tax return, because it's obviously similar to an ABN system, but you need to go and say how much you've earned and sort of get your tax back and so on. And I think there was some more. I don't think they touched upon the wages, but there might have been some legislation in place for, or sorry, legislation improvements when it comes to, I don't know if it was along the lines of like the amount of hours of work or some minimum thresholds that they've included, but I'm actually ignorant towards the specific details of that.
I think that it goes back to the algorithm for the most part, because the algorithm can decide, can effectively exploit people very easily, because it sets up the shifts, and sometimes it is people are supposed to work at very high pace, and that not just in Italy but throughout the world has led to all sorts of accidents, even mortal. What made me smile while I was reading the details of this part of the degree. It was about the verification system. There is basically two-step verification system, which it doesn't seem enough to me to block some criminal activities that already use fake identities, or like identities of other, handed to third people without documents. And yeah, it just seems a little bit naive, because I think I would be able to go through that. So I don't think why people living from from these crimes cannot. But the most important part, I thought, it was about the subcontractors. In Italy, we had actually now a long streak of highly publicized investigations about top investigators about exploitment within the delivery sector, within fashion, within all sorts of industrial sectors. And it all goes back to a large system of matryoshka, of Russian dolls activities that are put in place to bypass the regular regulations. And so you have workers working for cooperatives, working for subcontractors who works for the main company. And at the end of this ladder, people are basically not controlled. There's no investigation. There's no and no right for them. And so, if something can be made here, I think that would be pretty useful. But again, it seems more logical to me to act on the legislation side and make limits the cases where this subcontracting can go out, instead of acting on the investigation side and on the incentives, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know that. That's quite interesting. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know much about this specific topic, but from what you're saying, it's clear that we are talking about sectors that are not very regulated for different reasons, especially the riders, I think, because it's considered a new sector, even though it's not so new.
Not at all.
But for the politics timing, is new. They usually in Italy especially, these things are very extremely slow. Let's hope they're gonna regulate this. Let's see how it's gonna work. But
Sorry, just to put it in perspective, I am 34-year-old. I was delivering pizzas when I was 15, so that's 19 years ago. I wasn't on Uber, but I was still doing the same thing almost 20 years. Actually, 20 years ago.
I mean,
and so it's definitely not new. It's been around for a while. It's funny to think about this, but like when you put it in perspective with like how long it's been that this thing is going on. Now we just have this platform. Yes, we need to regulate that, but it's not like it didn't exist before. Like 15. These platforms are just bigger, but the same problem and the same thing existed. And by the way, no surprise, I was working, obviously, cashing in, no contract at all. A 15-year-old,
if
whatever.
you want, I feel that here there is a bit of I don't know if maybe it's also a bit of ideology of the parties, because in the past, from what I know as well, is you're having a relationship directly with the pizzeria, for example, okay?
Yeah, with the
pizza restaurant. So you're handling everything with them directly.
Yeah.
You are sort of higher, let's say, casual, and they were giving you some money for the delivery of, I don't know, for every pizza or something like that. And here we're talking about the very small company that this government lost so much, and also all the other governments in Italy. But now the issue is translated to major corporations, major companies like Uber or I don't know the name, Deliveroo. So it's still the same job for you that you're doing it, but how it's seen by the public opinion, by the politics, is different, because it's not you having a relationship with a small restaurant or pizza shop, how you want to call it, but it's you having a relationship with a big company like Uber Eats or Deliveroo, etc.
Yeah.
Then it is, of course, for the person that is doing it is the same, but it's not the same for who is
absolutely.
regulating this.
Yeah, and it obviously needs to regulate it. There's also a balance of power. Like there was a big balance of power, obviously, even in the small shop. But when it comes to big platforms that are essentially maybe a duopoly or an oligopoly, it is obviously different. The interesting things is some of the problems that happened then are still here and hopefully are going to get partially solved. But you are right that there is obviously a media aspect, especially in countries like Italy, where a lot of these big corporations are not seen well at all. And for example, as you probably all know, like Uber in the form of taxis and driving people around in Italy is not fully allowed. It's a very niche thing and much more expensive than normal taxis and so on. And so there is this. It exists in the form of Uber Eats and delivery, just because that service is sort of accepted and is not attacking or competing with a corporation, but for the other component of Uber, it actually doesn't exist in Italy because the corporation stopped them from entering. So it's important to, it's like all the circle closes with
Yeah.
corporations and stuff. But yeah, you're right. I think it's definitely a different dynamic. Cool.
I don't know if we want to move to talk about the Biennale in Venezia.
Yeah, I think very short, maybe 5-10 minutes on the Biennale event, which has happened last few weeks in Venice. I think the topic here we wanted to discuss is around the Russian stand. So the Biennale is obviously a architecture, as I was saying, architecture and arts expo that happens twice every 2 years in Venice, and each country has its own stand. It's actually beautiful. I highly recommend everyone to go. But anyway, each country has a stand, and since the Russian war, I think in the past we sort of shut it down, or Russia was not allowed. The decision, though, which the decision-making process is held by the head of the Biennale, who is a person that gets appointed, every 2 years. And at this round, or in the last few months, the person that was appointed was sort of pushing for Russia to be brought in or allowed to expose here at the Biennale. And I think there was I know there was some arguments within the government, within politics, within media about whether Russia should be included, yes or no. Regardless of the more, let's call it, the more media coverage and trying to sell newspapers and so on, I think what's interesting from political lens to look at is the fact that within even just the government, some members of government being in favor, some members being against the Russian being able to have their own stand there. I think the interesting part is this contradiction that sits within the government since the government started, which is some parts of the government, and this is a problem across Europe, not just Italy, but some part of the current Italian government is still sort of pro-Russia. It used to be way super pro-Russia, and then in recent years less vocal, but deep down probably pro-Russia, with accusation of also having influences and money and so on. I'm not saying it's a fact, but part of the government is like that. The other part is a bit more pro-Ukraine, mildly, I would say. But when these situations happen, the contrast between these two parts surfaces, and it is increasing, I think, because elections are upcoming, because they lost the latest referendum, and so the faction that is more pro-Russia is starting to push more and more. The vice prime minister, who's also the minister of transport and infrastructures in Italy, who is the pro-Russian side, was there at the stand. He was first in line. He's been seen there. So I think that's what we wanted to talk about. One last thing I want to mention is, maybe on a personal note, I'm obviously in favor of arts, architecture, and everything, but this stand was being managed. One of the person from the Russian side was very close, and some of the people that were organizing were also related or part of sort of the Russian government or extension of the Russian government. And so the debate of whether to include them or not is not more like we want to ban Russian artists. Like, that's not really a debate. It's more like who is coming here, who's setting the stand, and who's involved with it. And I think the counter argument is saying, well, these are people that are directly involved with the Russian government, which we consider obviously criminal government for what's been done in Ukraine. So I'll pass it on to you. Sorry, a long intro, but
Yeah.
I think
I will.
needed.
If I can go first, Fabio, I will be very short in here. Firstly, about the director of the Biennale, who is sort of in charge of this, the culture, Pietrangelo Buttafuoco is, I mean, if anyone interested, go and read who is this guy. so it's not a surprise under the point of view what he has decided in this regard. We are talking about someone that is clearly on that side of ideologically speaking. About the more interesting part is the contrast at the government. I agree with what Edoardo said. La Lega, no, the Liga is historically pro-Russian. It's not clear that they still have an agreement with the party, United Russia, of Vladimir Putin. They used to have it 100%. It's not clear if it's in there. Election are coming, so they sort of want to differentiate themselves. Moreover, I want to add one detail. On this specific topic, and not only on this specific topic, they have now a competitor. Vanacci that left the party, founded a new one by himself, and is basically following the same ideology as the current Minister of Transport, Matteo Salvini. So quite similar, like recycling the ideology, recycling the propaganda, also on this specific topic. So they have also a competitor that can basically take votes, and probably they don't want to lose those votes. So I think this is basically the challenge here. About one last word about the that is common in Europe. Yeah, in Italy, if you want, the very particular and unique stuff about Italy that in the opposition is the same. We have a party in the opposition that is also pro Putin and pro Russia. It's not that we have one party that is
Yeah.
by coincidence at this very moment part of the government. Uh, if the opposition will win the next election, we are going to be in the same situation. So yeah, this is, if you want, the very peculiar stuff about Italy at the moment.
Yeah.
So Pietangelo Buttafuoco, the chairman of the Venice Biennale, says, "This is art. Let art do art. Let's unite even in this period of dramatic conflict." Reality is, this is not just art. I don't see any reason why you should take money from a country that indirectly declared war to you and to the European Union, because you are taking money because each pavilion is sponsored by the government of the country. Moreover, you shouldn't spread the propaganda of a criminal regime. It's Putin oligarchy, it's Putin government who decides what artist goes to the Biennale. It's Putin's people who decide what kind of narrative has to be put in place. What narrative can hit the soft spots of the West. And it is all very funny because you have the managers of this pavilion that some are part of, like some are the daughters of some of high up oligarchs in the Russian government. This does not make any sense. This is not art. This is just a tool of a criminal regime to divide the other front. We all know how much Russian regime values the political side of war. How much money they gave to the political parties, to some political parties at both extremes of parliaments to push for appeasement during the war. And if you wanted let art to be art, you could, Buttafuoco, the director, could have simply invited some other Russian artists who are not expression of the regime.
Yep.
That would have been a very simple move. I would have respected that. Invite the dissidents, invite free people, but don't invite people from a criminal regime.
Yeah.
That is unjustifiable, and sometimes I don't know if these people just act because of just to feed their ego, because as Mattia said, this character is a funny one. He has followed many different ideas and ideologies in the past, and it looks like to me like poetic figure that was the nuncio that was kind of a futurist, yeah, artistic figure who made his life, who wanted to make his life an art piece itself, and by rallying for the clearly criminal side, but just saying that you are from the art side, on the art side. This is what I feel this guy is making, but he definitely doesn't have the same depth of the Nuncio, and he's a really shallow person at the end of the days.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Or not cool, but yeah, that's what
Yeah,
we got
sorry,
in Italy.
I ended on a sad note.
No, that's what we got. It's true. I mean, most of it I can agree with. Cool. I think we can close it off here for the episode. Thanks so much for obviously following. Hit a like or share if you find it useful or interesting, and obviously add comments with questions and feedback.
Yeah. See you next time.
Bye.